Okay, so this session is going to look at functionalism, and this is from the theory module of the course, page 203 to 206, and it is assessed on the 10 marker on paper 1 and the 10 and 20 on paper 3. So the first thing to look at is this machine image that I've got in front of you here. As you can see, the cogs are all leading into another cog. If we take one cog out of that machine, the entire machine will stop working. So a way to think about these cogs is that they rely on each other. They depend on each other. And if they do work properly, then the entire machine will work properly and will produce something. Now, for functionalists, they argue that society is like this machine. It has a series of different parts that, if they all work together well, it will end up creating a well-functioning, positive society. Now, who are the functionalists? Well, you've met the two main functionalists on the course already. The guy on the left is Talcott Parsons, and the guy on the right is Emil Durkheim. These are our two main functionalists. It's worth noting that Durkheim is 19th century to the early part of the 20th century, and Talcott Parsons is 1950s, 1960s. And so what Durkheim started, Parsons took further forward. Okay, key terms. Again, you'll be familiar with some of these, or hopefully all of them, but it's worth just fleshing out in a little bit more detail. Social solidarity. This is one of Durkheim's key terms. And what Durkheim argued is that in society, if we are functioning well as a society, you should have the feeling of being part of one body or community. You should feel together. You should feel safe. You should feel like you know the person you live next to. In his study of suicide, he found that Catholics committed suicide far less than Protestants. And his argument was that Catholics had more social solidarity because they lived with their friends and families, whereas the Protestants lived on their own, a little bit like we do today. Second functionalist concept, value consensus. So value consensus is when everyone in society agrees on what is right and wrong. For the functionalists, the only way you can have a well-functioning society is if you don't have constant disagreements about the law, if you don't have constant disagreements about which jobs are good, how the economy should work. Because if you have constant disagreements and conflict, then society can't ever function properly. Those cogs can't keep spinning. A collective conscience is this idea that you have this shared sense that you belong to a community. The collective is the group, and your conscience obviously is the thing that tells you what is right and wrong. And so a collective conscience is that shared moral sense that you have with everyone in your community. Collective conscience and value consensus go hand in hand. You get value consensus through a collective conscience. And socialization. Now, obviously, this is absolutely sociology 101. The functionalists come up with the concept of socialization, primary and secondary. The way individuals learn the values of society and the culture of a society. Okay, let's look at our first peel paragraph then that you would do on the 10 or 20s that I mentioned. So Parsons argues that we can understand society by thinking about it as a body. He calls this the organic analogy. Organic just means a living thing. So he's going to draw a comparison between the body that you see here on the screen and society. Well, what is that comparison? Society works in the same way that a body does, or at least in a similar way. The organs within a body are like the institutions in a society. Let's have a think about that. Let's look on the left here. You've got your orange lungs. Now, the lungs rely on the heart. The heart pumps blood into the lungs and out of the lungs. Now, at the same time, the lungs also rely on the stomach and the small and large intestine, because if the body wasn't processing food, it wouldn't then be able to get energy from that food, which wouldn't be able to help the heart pump the blood into the lungs. And so we could keep on going like this. We need the brain in order to help send messages around the body to make sure that all of those processes work and function properly. And without the bladder, without the liver, our body will eventually shrivel up and die. So in society, we have institutions instead of organs. The lungs might be the education system. The stomach could be the justice system. The brain could be the media. Religion could be the heart. Whatever it might be, you can substitute whatever institution you want in there. And each institution needs the other institutions. The whole system, the whole body, relies on the functioning of each part. But each part is distinct. The stomach is not the lungs. They do a different job. But the stomach needs the lungs, and the lungs need the stomach. So this is how Parsons envisioned it. Now, actually, just for the way that this diagram works, you would actually be able to draw a line from every institution to all the other institutions. But just to make it a little bit neater, I've drawn fewer lines. So an institution, remember, is a large part of society which serves a function. It serves a big job. They are a collection of people who are, or a collection of ideas or concepts that drive society forward. So let's have a think then about the education system, because we're familiar with that. Does the education system function on its own? Well, no, says Parsons. You need the family in order to have a functioning education system. We know that a well-functioning family leads to better results in the education system because you've looked at cultural deprivation already. But the education system also relies on and informs the media. Without the education system, you couldn't have the media because nobody would be able to read and write. And also the media then informs the education system with the way that it covers it, with what it argues for, it then influences the education system. Now the education system also influences the police and the justice system. If you have a well-educated population, then they're less likely to commit crime. If they're less likely to commit crime, then that affects the police and the justice system. You also need an education system in order to educate your police force and to educate your lawyers and your judges. And so all of these institutions impact and change and develop the other institutions. So when society is functioning well, you should see all of those institutions helping each other. Now, society for Parsons is a system, just like our body is a system. And we're still on that first pure paragraph here, just developing it. This will be the sort of the body, the chunk of the paragraph, if you like. Number one, the system. Self-regulating systems of interrelated, independent parts. The organs or the cells in the organic analogy. So these would be our institutions, the education system, media, the family. They are self-regulating systems. So what that means is that they organise themselves. They keep themselves going. Head teachers run schools. Then schools are not run by priests. Schools are not run by the family. They are run by people in the education system. However, as we just saw, the system is interrelated. It is related to other parts of the system, other parts of the body. The system needs. So just like a body needs food and water, a society needs value consensus and social solidarity. If people do not agree on what is right and wrong, then society will collapse. And you will no longer have a functioning, positive society. You will have things like rebellions or revolutions because everybody starts to disagree on what is right and wrong. Imagine if your society disagrees about who should be the ruler. Should you have a king and queen, or should you have a parliament? This has obviously happened in the past. As soon as you don't have value consensus and social solidarity, the system will start to die. The final one is the functions. So in a body, you have a nervous system, you have a blood flow, things that make each of these institutions work better. The economy is something that helps each institution to function. Because people go to work, they get taxed. Those taxes go into the education system, which then educate the next layer of workers, who then go to work. Those functions help that body to flow. Other functions would be things like infrastructure, roads, the internet. These are things that help the body to help the body that is the society to function effectively. So the final bit of this peel then, how do we actually get this social order? Well, Parsons argues that we have a shared culture of norms and values and beliefs, which then creates rules and expectations, and you finally get value consensus, which is how we get the social order that you see today. So we've got the organic analogy, which is like a system, and we run through the three types of system, and the final end of this theory for Parsons is value consensus, because we have this shared culture of norms and values that creates our rules. Okay, let's have a look at this as an example then. So Jeff is an employee of a company. What function does value consensus play in Jeff's life? And what does the system need to do in order for Jeff to be successful? Well, if we think about this as a functionalist, there's actually lots of things that have gone into making Jeff a successful, happy person. He needs shelter. The system has to create functions like housing in order to give him a roof over his head. Money. There needs to be an economy that functions properly in order to keep Jeff employed. Punctuality. Now, Jeff was actually socialised to be punctual. Now, Jeff actually needs to be punctual in order to be successful. And he's learnt that from his family. He's learnt that from his time in education. He has a value of work. He believes that work is a good thing, is a moral thing. And so he continues to do it. And why does he do that? Well, because he's got this shared idea and sense that he's got from everybody else in society that work is important. Okay, how do you maintain value consensus? Well, this is our second peel here, and we think about this as integration. Integration is when members of society work together, just like Jeff was doing. Well, how do you maintain that? How do you make sure that there is value consensus in your society? Well, the first thing we've mentioned is socialization. So socialization is designed to create internalization of norms and values. What we mean here is you want people to really believe in the norms and values of society. You want people to internalize them, to genuinely believe them. This is done through the family, education, media, and religion. And the second one is social control. So society will try to change the way you think to help you integrate, to help you become a part of society. But then it will also try to control you. So you have positive sanctions that reward and negative sanctions that punish. So for example, if you conform to the education system, if you follow the socialization of doing well in the education system, you will get a reward, you'll get a higher salary. If you don't conform, then you'll get a lower salary because you'll have worse qualifications. So society is trying to control its members to try and push them in the direction of value consensus, of believing what the society believes. There are obviously other forms of social control, like the police and the justice system, that deal with people that don't follow the value consensus. Now, Merton has our third peel, and he has an internal critique of functionalism. Now, be careful here, because Merton is a functionalist. I'll repeat that. He is a functionalist. But he's a functionalist who disagreed with some of what Parsons says. And so what we're going to look at here is evaluation, but in your essay, you could just do it as a straight-up peel. Now, I've made a mistake on these with Parsons, because his name is actually Talcott Parsons, not Parson ''S. So that's my fault there. Please don't make that mistake. It actually annoys me. What does Merton say about Parsons? Well, guilty of indispensability. What Parsons ignores is that there might be functional alternatives. Parsons argues things like the nuclear family is the best functional fit for society. Well, if single-parent families perform the same or better function than the nuclear, then Parsons is wrong. So what Parsons is guilty of here is saying the nuclear family is indispensable. We cannot go without the nuclear family. Merton just points out this is wrong, because you can have a family that has the exact same functional fit and it would work just as well or even better. Functional unity. So Parsons assumes that everything is related, but Merton argues that this is probably not true. So if you think about that machine with those cogs, do all the cogs really need each other? Do they really all relate to each other? Merton argues that modern society is really complicated, and so some of these relationships are really, really distant. A good example here is netball really connected to bricklaying? If we change netball, do we change bricklaying? Merton is going to argue, no, we don't change bricklaying by changing netball, and that's because we don't have functional unity. Everything is not related to everything else. Some things are related to other things, but some things are not related to other things. And the final one is universal functionalism, and this is where Merton actually sounds a little bit like a Marxist or a feminist. What universal functionalism is Merton argues that Parsons is guilty of thinking that functionalism is universal. It works the same way for everybody, but it doesn't. It doesn't function in a fair way for all groups. As you will learn next year in Crime and Deviance, the justice system does not work the same way for every part of society. If you are black, you are 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched. But obviously black people don't commit 7 times as much crime. So it's clear here that Parsons is assuming that society is fair, when in fact it isn't. His assumption is universal functionalism. Merton says universal functionalism is wrong. It's not actually the way it works. Okay, so let's have a look at some external criticisms now. So these are non-functionalists that are going to attack functionalism. And this is a logical criticism, a little bit of philosophy. Functionalism is teleological. So what we mean by that is it deals with the effects of things, not the causes of things. And this is easily understood with an example. Let's ask a question to a functionalist. Why does the family exist in the way that it does? Now, as a sociologist, this is what we should be doing, right? We should be answering that question. If we want to explain society, we should be able to answer that. But what does the functionalists say to us? They tell us that the family is there to provide socialization. Okay. That's what the family does. That's not why it exists in the way it does. That's not the cause of the family. That's what the family does. That's how it functions. If I asked you, so this is the effect of the family, not the cause. What actually causes the family? If I asked you, what has caused you to want to do well in your A-levels? And you said, I work hard. I would say, no, that's what you do, but what has caused you to want to work hard? Well, I take notes. Yeah, the fact that you take notes is what you do. That's not what causes it. The cause of that belief would be your initial socialization. So the functionalists have this problem across the board. When they look at religion, they argue that religion is a way of creating social solidarity. They don't argue what causes religion in the first place. Crime and deviance, they say that deviance and crime are functional. People need to see criminals being punished in order to learn value consensus. But that's not why you have crime in the first place. And so functionalism deals with effects, not causes. Marxism and feminism deal with causes. What Marxists and feminists say is the reason you have a family is because of unfairness and inequality, and because men or the capitalists have set it up in this way, they caused it to be the way it is. Okay, Popper would argue that functionalism is not falsifiable. He would say that a classic claim in functionalism, one of the central claims, would be that deviance is dysfunctional. So it goes against the norms, and that it performs the function of creating social solidarity. But the problem is, if you look back at that, functionalists have said that deviance is good and bad. They've said that it's dysfunctional, it goes against norms, and they've said that it's functional because it creates social solidarity, because other people see people going to prison, and they think, oh, I'm not going to do that myself. So deviance is therefore functional and dysfunctional. Now, why would Popper disagree with this? Popper, if you remember, wants all true statements to be falsifiable. Now, you can't prove the functionalist wrong here because they're having it both ways. They're saying that deviance is both functional and dysfunctional. Well, which is it? Popper would say that's not a scientific statement and so can't be declared true. Marxism and feminism, well, the Marxists argue that the functionalists just ignore conflict. Obviously, the Marxists think the functionalists are completely barking up the wrong tree. They just don't deal with class inequality at all. They presume that society is fair and positive and we all just need to follow value consensus. But for the Marxists, remember, value consensus is just the capitalists trying to control the way you think. So it's for the Marxists, it's totally flawed and fails to understand the real cause of society, which is capitalism. And the feminists say that it ignores conflict based on gender, and again, it doesn't even mention these damaging ideologies like patriarchy. What functionalists presume is that the ideology of society is positive and good. Feminists argue that the ideology of society is patriarchy and that is dominating and controlling of women. They would point to Parsons and his theory of the functional fit of the family and would suggest, look, there is a classically sexist theory. The idea is that women need to stay at home and look after the household in order to allow the man to go out to work. There is your sexism right there. Now, the Interactionists, or sometimes called the labelling theorists, the interpretivists and most postmodernists, they don't like functionalism either, because they argue that it fails to understand society. It focuses on large institutions. Functionalism looks at the police, the justice system, the education system, the media, etc. And it says these institutions cause the behaviour of individuals. These institutions socialise individuals. Well, for the Interactionists, they take a micro perspective. They take a bottom-up perspective. That's why they like to interview people or do participant observations. They want to understand the free thinking decisions of individuals. Functionalists presume that we are all robots. The Interactionists say that we are not, and that really the functionalists don't know anything about society because they don't study the people in society. They only study the institutions, and institutions are made up of people. So why is functionalism a good theory then? So it does have its benefits, even though it's slightly out of fashion in modern sociology. Well, it's a macro theory. So as we just saw, the Interactionists suggest that their micro theory would be better. But a macro theory does have benefits because it can look at large-scale problems and deliver large-scale solutions that benefit millions of people. A good example of this would be understanding socialization. If you understand the way that socialization works, you can actually deal with the problem of cultural deprivation in schools. If you deal with that problem, then you can make millions of people's lives better. So the key thing about functionalism being a good theory is that it is a big theory. It looks at society in a macro way and can come up with big solutions that will affect millions of people. Okay, here's our summary then. We've got 3 peel paragraphs. You've got Parsons, who gives us our basic outline with the organic analogy leading on to value consensus. You can analyse Parsons with just about everything we've looked at. Merton, logical, Popper, Marxism, feminism, even your interactionism would be fine there as well. Then we had our integration, where we looked at the 2 ways that functionalists believe we are integrated through socialisation and social control. Again, analysed with Merton, Marxism or feminism. In particular, I would analyse with Marxism and feminism here, just because they would argue that that integration is integration into a damaging ideology. Whereas Parsons says that it's integration into a positive ideology, so if you work hard, you get more money from your salary. Marxists would say, yeah, that's the exact process that is attacking the working class. So that's where they really disagree with each other. And for Merton, as a functionalist, you can still attack him with Marxism, feminism, and interactionism. Now, if you got a question on functionalism for theory on paper 1 and paper 3, you can include all of this as well. You can include all the other topics. Now, you've studied functionalism in loads of different ways. The family education, you will look at beliefs in crime and deviance, and so you can answer with any of these topics as well as examples. I've tried to use as many in this video as I can, but that's a really, really useful thing to be able to do as well. Here are some typical questions. Outline and explain 2 functionalist concepts. You just have to pick 2 and expand on them. Social solidarity, value consensus, collective conscious, socialization. Pick one of those and just expand, explain. Outline and explain 2 criticisms of functionalism. Again, you could just go for Merton here. You could pick 2 of Merton's. You could pick one of the logical. You could pick Marxism, feminism, interactionism. Loads of options there. And evaluate the claim that functionalism fails to understand conflict within society. You would just do Parsons as one of your peels, Merton as one of your peels, Marxism as one of your peels. Use feminism as one of the analysis, maybe the analysis for Parsons. Loads of options for that one as well. Okay, hope that was helpful.